I've been trying to get this video out for about a month, maybe more, but many things got in the way. I had a couple of trips that I wasn't planning, but I loved them and I learned from them as I always do, and they do contribute to my knowledge so I can write later about what I've learned. However, I did promise I would do my best to explain whether China is socialist or capitalist. So here we go. Wherever you are, welcome to another of my takes on China. And so many people have asked me this: is China socialist or capitalist? And the simple answer is yes and no. I'd like $1 for each of the number of times people have told me that China has only grown and been successful because the US allowed them to, or that China didn't grow because of socialism, it grew because it's capitalist. And my answer to that is, well, why don't you adopt the same methods in your own country and you can accept constant growth, public satisfaction, public benefits? And the answer is usually, we couldn't do that, it's communist, proving that most people who argue with me about China being capitalist or communist have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. But I have to admit, it's a little confusing, so I'll start with a scenario and I'll work through from there. Imagine in this scenario, and for people in China this is hard, but for people in the West they know exactly what this feels like. Imagine you're paid less this year for doing the job you've done several years. Then you get your income, the salary buys less than it bought before. Your landlord charges you more this year than they did last year, and if you're lucky enough to own your own home, you probably also have a mortgage. But for many of us, we suffer mortgage fluctuations. It goes up and it goes down, and we accept that because over time, the property that we own increases in value. However, as the property increases in value, the local government charges a high amount of that value in taxes. And this is a tax for the land that we own, the building that's on it. Now, I'm no mathematician, so I went to Chiwen AI for some help with this, and I found that using a dynamic search scenario, buying a home for $50,000 in the USA in 1975, which is the year I left school and started work, by 1995 that home would be worth $180,000, and that seems great, but it's not. The owner will have paid $52,000 in local taxes to live there, but this is where it gets even more scary. If it was purchased with a 30-year mortgage, which is normal, over the first 20 years, the AI calculator tells me the repayments would have been $96,554, and there's still $31,000 left to be paid. Imagine that. You bought it for $50,000, over $100,000's been paid, and 20 years later you owe $31,000. When the mortgage is finally paid, you will have paid at least 5 times the value of the home you bought, and even though the mortgage is now paid, you're still paying taxes for the rest of your life to live there. Now, the upside is you have an asset that's probably worth over $200,000, maybe $300,000. The downside, it's cost you about $250,000, and that doesn't include the electricity and water that you've consumed. It doesn't include the insurances that you needed. China's system doesn't have this problem. Homes are affordable. Most people pay cash, or they borrow money from family. Monthly incomes continue to rise and constantly stay ahead of inflation. People are getting wealthier as their income increases, so do their savings. And here's the big thing: China has no property tax. Once you own your home, it's free to live there. China controls all the utilities and delivers them at affordable prices. So for my case, it cost me 30 RMB a month for all my water in a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom home. It costs less than 400 a month for electricity in the summer and only 200 RMB a month in the winter. 400 is about $57 and 200 is less than $30 US. If I was living in many of the larger northern cities in winter, my heating would be free, as the hot water is pumped through to my radiators from the power stations. I have gas water heating here, and for cooking too, my gas bill is less than 100 RMB a month. In total, because I have no mortgage, I pay on average less than 500 RMB a month to live here. That's about $82 US or 50 British pounds to live in this apartment. That's what state control gives us. Now, you might not ever get rich owning a home in China, but you'll always have an affordable roof over your head. Once you've bought it, you get 70 years of land use before needing to renew that. But if it's still in your family, that's free. If you're selling it, there's a one-off fee. Mine was 20,000 RMB, and I own the apartment and the land it sits on for the next 67 years. Job security. Western countries over the last 50 years, it's decreased considerably. When I left school, I got a job. It was a real job, 40 hours a week plus overtime if I did more. It included deductions for healthcare, which was free once it had been deducted, for my pension, which I now receive. And if I was unemployed for a period of time, I would get unemployment benefits. Nowadays, kids leaving school go on a casual or a 0-hour contract or gig work, and they're paid. In the UK and Australia, they might get medical coverage, but they have to wait a month to see a doctor or even years to see a specialist. If the injury or illness is not life-threatening, then it might take a decade to get it sorted out. In China, I walk down to the hospital, I register at the front desk, I join a queue, and I see a doctor within an hour or less than 2. I can usually see a specialist the same day or the next day. If I need an operation, I'll get it when I need it. I don't have insurance here, but for example, an appendectomy, which one of my friends recently went through, cost him a total of 27,000 RMB, including a hospital visit, hospital stay, the operation, all the treatment and medication. Not bad. Schools are free for 10 years. Universities are affordable, and they're now ranked with the best in the world. Now, I don't say this. I actually went looking for and found a US website that ranks them, and I've linked it. What's more, the cost of them is affordable, even for foreign students. Rarely more than $5,000 US a year, and living expenses of another $200 to $300 US a month will be needed. But how does that compare with a degree in any Western country? Capitalism won't do that. Socialism does that. Now that I've set that scene, I want to come back to the original question: socialism or capitalism? According to CGTN, and I'm using a lot of their research here, the term socialism is often understood differently in the United States. For instance, progressive Democrats are often branded by Republicans as socialists. But what they advocate, these Democrats, is different from both Marxist socialism and their ideology upheld and the system taken by China. To these Democrats, private ownership and market economy are still considered the main bodies of US institutions, even though they push for more government control over the economy. That's not a bad thing, though. It's often quite plain and simple. No matter how far progressives go in the West, they never depart from these two principles of private ownership and a free market. Now, this, however, leaves ground for people to sow doubt about the way China works. But anyone who's been to China and approaches it without any bias would draw the conclusion that China is nowhere near a system that Westerners are so familiar with. And whilst China generally refers to itself as a state capitalist country, the situation is more nuanced. In the 1950s, when the Communist Party of China eliminated elements of exploitative classes and institutions, China began to enter the phase of building a socialist society. It needed to address the principal contradiction facing society at that time, and that is one between the ever-growing material and cultural needs of the people and the backwardness of social production. The system was built entirely on the public ownership of production means. That's Marxism, with a planned economy in accordance with Karl Marx. But the extremes of such a system are clearly something that the CPC has steadfastly tried to avoid. The need to prevent China from heading down a path that goes against the tide of the times has thus necessitated the incorporation of something they call Chinese characteristics. This was first coined by Deng Xiaoping in 1982. The concept of socialism with Chinese characteristics aims to redefine the relations between three things: planning and socialism, which is fundamental to Marxism, market economy, which will allow growth, and capitalism, which would allow some people to grow faster than others. However, the need to grow, as Deng pointed out, allowed these trailblazers to obtain financial success in a controlled and motivated manner so that the path would be paved for others who aspire to seize similar opportunities. And this changed the idea of pure Marxism into a system which allowed growth through controlled capitalism. It was a genius strategy. It's preserved institutions of socialism and public ownership while importing sophisticated management experience and advanced market mechanisms from more developed countries. It works. Deng further explained that planning and market forces are not the essential difference between socialism and capitalism. A planned economy is not the definition of socialism because there's planning under capitalism too. The market economy happens under socialism as well. Planning and market forces are both ways of controlling economic activity. It's just done differently. The existence and growth of private ownership does not necessarily undermine socialism or even promote capitalism in China. So Reform and Open Up initiated these changes by Deng in 1978 and adopted elements of a market economy, which became the first major step in the creation of what we now know as socialism with Chinese characteristics. More recently, Xi Jinping has said the Chinese socialist system and state government system didn't drop out of the sky, emerged from the Chinese soil through a long process of revolution, economic development, and reform. So they're constantly doing it. Over the past 4 decades, the path of socialism with Chinese characteristics has led China to remarkable achievements. China's gross domestic product, GDP, grew from just 150 billion in 1978 to 18.7 trillion last year, and it continues to rise about 5% a year. Its GDP per capita rose from 156 to 13,000. And when the CPC celebrated its centenary in 2021, they had already achieved a moderately prosperous society. The World Bank now registers China as the richest economy in the world in terms of price-purchase parity. And here's an amazing statistic. Over 90% of Chinese adults own their own home. Not only that, over 75% of them have no mortgage. And remember, there are no property rates or taxes here. That means once the home is paid for, it's literally rent-free living for life. Only a few countries in the world have this kind of ownership, and they are all socialist. So where does this take China into the future? On recognizing the achievements, Xi Jinping has said what we face now is the contradiction between unbalanced and inadequate development and the people's ever-growing needs for a better life. So the gap between the rich and poor, as well as the gap between the rural and urban regions, are being closed. Infrastructure that Westerners decry as unsustainable is built, not because the country looks for a return on investment, but because the construction and operation of them narrows that gap again. Only socialist countries will do this. In capitalist countries, there needs to be a return on investment measured in dollars over years. In China, the cost-benefit analysis for a train line or a new freeway or any other major infrastructure development is not measured in terms of how soon can we recover the costs. It's measured in how much will this improve the lives of the people invested in it. A return on investment is not about financial return, but about lifestyle improvements. So to further crystallize what is considered the country's guiding principle, new elements are consistently injected into the concept of socialism with Chinese characteristics, a concept that was originally invented to address national growth and basic human needs, has now evolved into something that's relevant to many aspects of Chinese society today. From bringing food to the table, just ensuring people had enough to eat, to now having options to choose from. The transformation process is expected to last a long time, and Chinese leaders through regular meetings continue to commit to seeing it through. All the advances made over the years have been part of an attempt to deal with the issues that arise as China forges its own path. Perfecting or perfecting China's socialist institutions also means adhering to Marxist teachings, advancing with time, adapting to changing circumstances such as climate change, biodiversity, the introduction of automation and robotics as mundane and dangerous or repetitive work is taken away from humans and handled by robots. And one more important thing China strives to do, and that is to seek truth from facts. And the fact is, China is a socialist country. The vast majority of people benefit from socialist policies, but there are capitalist additions which Marx might not have approved of when he wrote the Communist Manifesto, but for sure he'd agree they work in China for the Chinese. Because what was he trying to do? He was trying to improve the lives of the masses. If you take one look at China today, the masses have much improved lives. So China is socialist, but it does have some Chinese characteristics. And I hope that kind of answers the question. But if you've got more comments, please put them into the comments section and I'll see if I can answer them for you. See you next time.